hard to not notice that it's a full moon night. On the other hand, when you live in a city, the moon is easy to forget about. I'm actually curious, how many of you have any idea whether the moon is getting bigger or getting smaller right now? Right.
We do. We have a special interest on that. I have it on my Google Calendar.
Perfect. So it's easy to forget, right? It's easy to ignore. Because it's no longer actually a very interesting source of light. All of the street lights are much stronger. Your phone in your face at night is much stronger. So the question was, is there evidence from this toba population that has not got a lot of electricity that the moon was, at least historically, probably affecting our sleep? And then comparing that to modern populations to understand the change that has happened, the difference. And I want to add, for more context, when I was a student of Horacio's, this paper that you saw the title of was called Moonstruck Sleep. And that was actually a riff off of this earlier paper, 10 years previous, that Horacio was also involved in, which was called Moonstruck Primates. And this was the only New World monkeys that are thought to be nocturnal. And this was the first actograms. There's this guy that has a ranch that let scientists onto his ranch and put little collars on these monkeys called owl monkeys. And this actogram was the first actogram that came back from this effort. And Horacio was very excited and was showing me as a student. And this, I think, probably as much as anything I had seen in grad school, changed my life and drove me towards data science, although I didn't know that was a thing at the time. But you don't need stats, you don't care what the average is. You can look at this and you can understand, right? So the black is when is this monkey active, and you can see that it's got this seasonal pattern, right? It curves in, it curves out as the days are getting shorter and longer. And then there's this amazing barber pole striping. Any guesses, what is this funny striping? I'll give you a hint, I'm not showing you this figure by accident. It's highly contextualized. It's the moon. It's the moon. So these black dots are the new moon, and on new moon nights, there's very little activity. On full moon nights, halfway in between them, there's a ton of activity. And it gets later because the phase of the moon is changing night by night a little bit. Now again, I don't need to know math to look at this and go, these monkeys don't care about being nocturnal, these monkeys care about low light levels. They care about being active when it's bright but not too bright. And so they're at dawn and dusk, and they also follow the moon. These arrows, there were 3 different lunar eclipses that occurred just by chance in a row there. And we can't see it in these data, but if you zoom in, during the moments of the lunar eclipse, all of the activity stops. Right, so it's not necessarily that these monkeys have a moon clock, which would be weird because most mammals seem to not, but they just care about light, and so they're responding to the change in their environment. And so when you can see the data, these things are super clear, right? This was a controversial paper. Everybody knows mammals don't have lunar clocks. That's crazy talk. Why are you trying to do science about lunar clocks? That's not a thing for mammals. Well, the argument gets put to bed real fast when you can just see the data, right? So I thought this was super cool, and this will tie in tomorrow when we talk about arguments about menstrual rhythms in women, and again, being able to see the timing rather than argue about what you think ought to be. So suffice to say, I was very excited to see that they were doing this, even though it took 10 years to build, doing this in humans also. So first thing that they found was looking at these 3 different toba populations, so people that are rural with no light exposure, no electric light exposure, people with some limited light exposure, and people living in a fully urban environment. And what is really, really interesting to me, so we're looking at a couple of different sleep metrics. So this is sleep onset after dusk, when did you go to sleep? This is how long did you sleep for, duration. And in all of them, we see there's this nice rhythmicity, right? And in the green, where they're urban, they're sleeping a little less long, or they're in bed a little less long. This is activity-based, so they're in bed a little less long. And they're going to bed a little bit longer after dusk, apparently, or becoming still when it's really darker. But even in the urban populations, with some light or with no light, it's hard to tell the difference. But once you have light, you're in this different group. You're separate from the green. And yet, surprisingly, given how much we all pay attention to the moon, it still shows up in the sleep data, right? I was shocked by that. I think a lot of people didn't expect that finding.
We were, we checked the data like 1,000 times because we couldn't believe it.
So then, the part that was so incredibly cool, not that this wasn't already cool enough, was Horacio was continuing the kind of thing that I had been doing as a student, where he was now putting wearable devices on students as a lab activity, and rather than ask them to log stuff, measure it directly. So he had gotten a small grant from the school to buy, I believe, about 100 wearable devices and put them on the physiology students as one of their labs. And so they said, well, we see this in this TOBA population. Surely in Seattle, in college students, very modern, we won't see that. Surely the city lights and modern schedules will obscure that. Well, that's not the story that the data tell, right? Once again, we see these really pretty clear rhythmicity. Once again, I found this utterly shocking. I don't think that it's intuitive at all that your sleep, my sleep, is in fact changing as a function of the moon that we weren't paying attention to. And individually it might not be, right? These are aggregations across a population. But as a trend, it's absolutely the case that that influence seems to persist. And so I find this really beautiful because it speaks to a number of causes that I think data are able to profoundly affect. One, we have no good intuition for this. So if you ask somebody, does the moon matter for modern people, they would say, no, you're crazy.
Yeah, we've been insulted on Twitter by